is equivalent, I think, roughly to 3 times the gross national product of the Irish Republic. So it's fairly kind of staggering. If you're a taxpayer in Ireland, you would be seriously, I would be
but
seriously.
Doesn't it mean they won't go broke, those banks, because the government backs them? Or does it mean they'll take rash decisions because they know they're safe?
Well, certainly that. I mean, there are no impositions on the boards of these Irish banks to do anything at all. And they're not just protecting the depositors, they're protecting the bondholders and the shareholders. It's, you could have said, you know, in the 1930s, you could say, well, America thought they were being threatened by foreign trade and so on, so they put up trade barriers. And so then they did the same in Europe, and they did the same in Japan. And the consequences of that was that the global economy froze up. I think that, luckily Ireland is quite a small economy, but I really think strongly that, first of all, the European Union ought to have a strong feeling about this, because it is a threat to our banks. You know, good people are asking the question you've just asked. And that's a dangerous question to be asking for, not just for, you know, our personal finances, but for the state of the economy, and I think for the broader kind of European Union. So I think we should be worried about it, and we should oppose it politically.
Mr. Twinney, what do you make of that?
It's interesting. I mean, the government gave a guarantee for Northern Rock. Now you can't get money into Northern Rock, so that was a limited guarantee. I don't understand. From where I sit...
Buy national savings if you feel that nervous.
But that has a very poor rate of return. It appears to be a go to Ireland, no risk. Stay in the UK, there is risk.
Jackie Smith.
Well, first of all, I think Richard's absolutely right that the objective here surely has to be that people are confident with where they have saved their money. The action that has been taken over the last year, firstly, the action that was taken with Northern Rock, secondly, what we did over the weekend with Bradford and Bingley, means that there is no saver in this country who has lost money because of what is a very difficult and in many ways a fundamental issue for our financial services sector. But that has been done in this country in a way, for example, with respect to Bradford and Bingley, that does safeguard savers, also safeguards the taxpayer's position. That's been our objective throughout this. We've done what has been necessary up until now to make sure that no saver has lost a penny in this country despite the difficult circumstances, and that's what we need to continue doing as we face this difficult time.
Why did you put the level, or are going to put the level up of guarantee from £35,000 to £50,000? Isn't that saying to people, if you've got more than 50,000, don't trust the bank?
No, that's something that the Financial Services Authority have been consulting on, where we will come to a conclusion and announce it next week. But I think what people need to do is they need to look at the experience of what's happened so far. It is crucially important that people have confidence in the system. One, because it means that they actually feel confident about their savings and don't have the sort of run on the bank that is actually going to make that those difficulties in the system have contagion throughout the rest of it. But also, of course, because this isn't only even about people's savings, crucial though that is, it's also about having a system which is stable enough to ensure that people are still able to borrow money to buy houses, that small businesses and others are still able to borrow money in order to expand, that you can be confident about your savings, that you can be confident that actually the stability is doing everything it can to help you to keep your job. And I think Richard's also right that for us as a country, we have a solid economic basis. We have built it on being willing and able to trade and being open, and it's very important that we actually maintain that.
The woman in red there.
But isn't it the case that providing a guarantee to these banks essentially gives the bankers a get-out clause and thus provides an incentive to take unnecessary risks, the sort of things that could lead to problems in the future?
Michael Heseltine.
Well, Jackie says that no savers have lost money. That, of course, is not true. Huge numbers of savers have lost money as they've seen their pension funds dramatically reduced. Very large numbers of people have lost money on shares. And so there's a very big question as to how we got into this mess in the first place. But sticking very specifically to the issue, the reason, of course, the Labour Party adopted a 50,000 ceiling is because the Conservatives called for it, and so they raised their 35,000 to 50. But there is, I think, there is a serious issue in this ceiling, and it is this. There are two sorts of people who could easily have more than 50,000. The first are people who've sold their houses and are waiting to buy another one. 50,000 doesn't buy you much of a house in this country today. There could be lots of families, lots of people with very significant sums on deposit in banks because they are halfway between buying and selling houses. And I think that should be recognised. The second is elderly people. And of course, everybody should have watched the television, everybody should have made adjustments, they should have moved their money into different banks in different ownerships, so they had several £50,000 ceilings.
You really believe they should have done that? The opposite of what?
A lot.
Just for the record, Lord Heseltine, £50,000 guarantee covers 97% of British bank deposits.
I fully understand that.
So it's
But you're saying
pretty well
people should have
everybody's
taken the action that he was saying it would be absolutely wrong in
I'm
terms
just too lazy to do it. I'm not saying it's wrong to do it.
It isn't what I think, it's what people are doing.
Have you moved all your money into little pots of different
but
banks?
I haven't. But the fact
Probably
is
not enough
that
banks to go round.
a large number...
Rather cheap start, I would say. Yeah, done.
A large number of people have got the sort of sums of money well above £50,000. And as I say, there are two categories. But the second category are the elderly. And of course, people watching television, working it all out, they can work out that they should move their money so that they have a £50,000 limit in any one bank and they're protected. I would guarantee that if the worst came to it, there would be some harrowing cases of elderly people with a couple of £100,000 who said, no one told us, we didn't know. There always are, in tragedies, people who didn't know, weren't told. And I think that the authorities should recognise these two categories in the ceilings that they're talking about.
Well, create a separate category for them. All right, Charles Kennedy.
It's understandable that people will want to behave like this. It's entirely desirable that they don't. In fact, now that we've heard it from Michael Heseltine, if he's not moving his money around as we speak, that's good enough for a pauper like me, I can tell you that. The gentleman mentions national savings. From what I see and hear from people round about just today, the problem with national savings is you could try and pour a lot of money in there if you want. Trying to get somebody at the other end of the phone, so many other people are engaged in the same process, is mightily difficult. It seems to be a case of don't phone us, we'll phone you right now. I think two things are needed. One is clarity from the government. There's a lot of people still out there, whether it's 35,000, 50,000, who don't appreciate, and it's not been made terribly clear, that an amount of money that you've got with a bank and another or equivalent amount of money that you've got somewhere else may in fact not all be liable for compensation or security because they're part of the same overall group. So there's a big education process, information process. I don't think the government have been clear enough about that. The other thing is the European dimension, and I agree with what Richard was saying about Ireland. You can't have, particularly the globalised nature of this problem and the fact that we're all part of a single European market, albeit not all of us part of a single European currency. You can't have people going off freelancing like this, which is why the weekend summit that Gordon Brown's going to is very important. I hope we can get a coordinated European response. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. Or if we don't, what's happening at an alarming extent, or becoming an alarming extent within the UK, is going to be replicated right across Europe. And that's going to make everybody in an even more precarious position than we are at the moment.
Okay, Janet Street-Porter.
Well, I'm kind of fascinated when Jackie says that the country's got a solid economic base, because the fact of the matter is the number of people, it doesn't matter what Michael says, he's rich, he's posh, most of the people in this country have not got 50,000 quid in the bank. Most of the people in this country, under the tutelage of Gordon Brown as Chancellor, have built up more personal debt than more per capita personal debt than any other country in the EU. We've been brilliant at giving people money for nothing and telling people you can have something on credit. So most people in this country with this, I mean, sir, you are in the minority. You asked the question about your 50,000 quid in the bank, but I can't imagine that a lot of people watching this programme have that problem. If they're not rich bankers in the city, most people don't have 5,000 quid in the bank, let alone 50. It would be... I mean, it's criminal. talks about caring about the poor, but if he cared about the poor so much, he'd teach them the value of money age 4 and upwards, so that by the time they left school, they wouldn't have 10 credit cards and run up the level of debt that we have in this country.
Richard Lambert, briefly.
Just very quickly, until a year ago, nobody asked the question about what deposit guarantees were, because it's irrelevant. The really important thing is not the size of the deposit guarantee, it's restoring stability to the banking system. That's a job for politicians and bankers, and that's the thing that really has to be done.
Can I just Janet, of course you're right. The vast majority of people do not have the sort of sums we're talking about, but the people who do are the most vulnerable, the retired whose savings are at risk. That's why it's so important.
Very briefly,
The key point to maintain confidence is that people feel, as we've said, that we will do everything necessary in order to safeguard their savings. Bradford and Bingley, which of course, where there was a problem, we used the powers that we had put in place in the banking bill earlier this year in order to transfer people's savings to Abbey Santander to safeguard them, with a sort of guarantee behind that necessary, incidentally, Michael, using powers that had been opposed by the Tories when we tried to bring them in exactly the same way as they opposed the approach that we took to Northern Rock, and as they opposed the approach that we took last week to preventing people through short selling from profiting and making even more instability in the system.
We
frankly,
only opposed it because we had an alternative way of achieving the same end.
All right. So I want to go back to the woman in red who asked a question which hasn't been answered, and we've actually got a question here on that line. But just repeat what you said, and then I'll go to the questioner at the back there.
But don't actions like this, taking these safeguards, undermine the system in the long term? Because it allows the bankers to think that they've got a get-out clause. It allows them to think that no bank is ever going to be allowed to go bust. So it makes them take unnecessary risks.
OK, and I'm going to tie that in with a question from Yolande Fernando-Pulle, please.
Is it right that the taxpayer, here and in America, should bail out financial institutions which may have been speculating with their investors' money?
So the 2 points together, is it just simply right for the taxpayers and doesn't just encourage the bankers to be reckless? Who'd like to take that? Michael Heseltine?
Of course, in an ideal world, one would expect those who take the risk to pay the price. And many of them do, in losing their jobs or losing their shares in the businesses or whatever it may be. But the fact of the matter is, you have to weigh the alternatives. And the banks going under, the financial credit of the way our country works collapsing is not just about bankers. It affects all of us. And this is why the American debate going on now, which of course reflected the resentment of the ordinary American punter against Wall Street, is actually, although understandable, misleading and misguided. Because the fact is, if you can't get credit from your bank, it freezes investment, it slows up the whole credit business in the economy, and you'll already see, I mean, it's only just beginning, but those of us who are involved in commerce in one way or another, we know that every day more and more worrying news is coming out of the economy. Not the financial sector just, right through the economy. Look what's happening on the high street, the level of sales. Look what's happening in the motor industry, the number of cars that are not happening, the beginning of 4-day weeks in the manufacturing industry, the collapse of Britain's export markets. All these things are beginning to happen. You ain't seen nothing yet. That's why, on a balance of argument, you have to save the financial system.
Charles Kennedy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this that does feel very offensive. There's no doubt about that. It does feel very offensive to people, and understandably so. But it is the least worst option. That is the awful truth of the matter. And I think it sticks in the gullet for many of us that people who have poured paraffin in the flames of this situation are going to walk away not just scot-free, but probably walk away the richer still more. That's ridiculous. But it is correct, and you are seeing this and you are hearing this, that once business can't invest, just take the construction sector. Historically in this country, construction hugely important as it is to any economy. If you look at unemployment, which I fear is now going to rocket in the next 6 months or so, it's certainly starting in construction and construction-related activity, right through the economy. If you look at whether it's private finance initiatives or whether it's more publicly orientated finance initiatives. Nonetheless, a lot of things that were going to happen, civic improvements, infrastructure improvements, things that make the economy more competitive and make the quality of our lives better, are now being put on hold because the money is not flowing. Now, we've got to get that back, or unemployment goes up, the bills to the state as a result of people being idle, with all the social hardships that that causes and the economic strains it puts on the country as a whole, are going to get worse. And of course, you begin to, if you're not careful, dip into recession. So yes, it's not palatable what's happening, but my God, if we were sitting here in 6 or 12 months' time and this kind of action hadn't been taken, it would be a damn sight worse. That's the sad truth of the matter.
Yes. The woman on the gangway there, yes, just briefly if you would.
How much longer will it take before things start to get better, and how much worse are they going to get before we see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Okay, who'll have a go at that, and then we'll move off the economy onto something else. Yes, Richard Lemon.
I think it's going to be a tough 18 months. I don't know how tough, but we are already, I think, in a mild recession, and I think that through 2009 it's going to feel uncomfortable. I hope that in the not too distant future will be possible for the Bank of England to cut interest rates. I hope that, contrary to what Lord Heseltine says, that actually exports will start to lift. After all, sterling has been weak in the last months, and so trade is actually bolstering somewhat. I hope that will bolster it. And I hope, above all, that this dreadful kind of freeze-up in the credit market unglues itself and we can start going back to proper business. And if that happens, then by the end of next year we'll be feeling better.
Okay. All done?
I don't think anyone knows.
All right. The question began with Roger Twinney and whether he should move his deposit savings to an Irish bank. Just a matter of curiosity, how many of you have taken evasive action in the last sort of week or so, months or so, just to see? One or two, very few. Three.
Anyone on the panel there, Chairman?
I don't know anyone on the panel. I didn't know about that. I'm not going to ask the panel. What have you done as a matter of interest?
I split it up. And like Mr. Twinney, I'm also coming up to retirement. And I'm rather disappointed that the panel actually haven't answered his question. His question
I'm
was...
a pensioner. Hang on. I'm a pensioner with money in the bank. And I got up this morning and it was the first thing I thought about. And it's, to be honest, if I'm really honest with you, I've thought about it all day and I asked Richard for advice. And he gave me his advice and I'm going to ignore it.
You mean it's off to Ireland?
We are both in the same bank, he told me earlier.
Yeah, and you're ignoring his advice?
I'm going to move some of my money, yeah.
All right, OK. Somebody else, yes, you said the back.
You know what your first phone call tomorrow morning will be.
And the woman there in blue, yes, just out of curiosity.
And split it up, and I suppose I was listening to what people were saying and was thinking that I think I've worked very hard, I'm not suggesting anyone on the panel hasn't, to get the money I have, and I'm very, very unconfident about taking the risk, which it seems that the panel members are. And I kind of get the idea that panel members maybe are in the know a bit more than I am, and if were they to decide something different and shift their money, would they tell me? So I've taken early action.
OK. Let's go on. Thank you very much. Just before we go on, where is question time next? We're in Hackney in London, favoured part of London for the Home Secretary next week. And
didn't get it.
What? The place you didn't think people walked around late at night, but we're before midnight, so it's probably right. We've got the University Secretary, John Denham, with us, and the Bishop of Rochester, Dr. Nazir Ali. Then we're in Stoke the week after that. And I don't know whether there's going to be a reshuffle, but at the moment we're having the Chief Whip, Jeff Hoon, with us, confident that he'll still be in post. Now, the next thing is that we're going to be in Washington, not Washington in the north of England, but Washington, D.C., at the end of October, just a few days before the American elections. So if you'd like to come to Hackney or Stoke or Washington, or more important, know anybody in the Washington area who might like to come to Question Time, the same number is the right one to call, 0871 626 9988, or you can apply via our website. Now let's come down to good old politics. Deborah Smith, please.
Has David Cameron done enough to convince voters he's the right man with the right plan?
His very words here in Birmingham this week. Charles Kennedy.
No, I don't think he has, and I don't think he would have expected to have achieved that in the course of an hour or indeed several days of a much disrupted Conservative Party conference. It was interesting. I was driving in my car and listening to 5 Live, and I listened to the entire speech for an hour on the radio, which is not something I've done with a political speech for a long time. And I'm less critical, or negative in fact, than some of the commentators have been. It's a bit, you mentioned the American presidential elections. At this time when there's a presidential election, they always replay the Nixon JFK debates, and people listening on the radio thought Nixon won, and people watching on TV thought Kennedy had won. I thought it was a better structured, better delivered speech listening to it. Watching it later on, I began to see where some of the criticisms perhaps were coming from. So that in itself, the medium's got a lot to do with it, I think. But no, he's not persuaded people, and he wouldn't have been trying as yet to persuade people. I think he's in for a very, and I think he knows this, in for a very tough time now, because a long parliament, which it looks almost certainly this is going to be, is a very difficult thing for the leader of the larger opposition party to maintain such a big lead. When you've got very little to achieve, the main event is not coming your way, which is the general election. That's going to be tough for him. And I would have avoided, having been kind about his speech, I would have avoided the man with the plan line, and I would have avoided also, beware the politician or any public figure who says, now today I want to talk to you about character. And by the way, I want to talk to you about my character. It's a very good character. Now I'm sure David's is a very good character, but I don't think you should put it that way if you want to get that point over to people. That should speak for itself.
Janet.
I don't think he has done enough to convince voters. But there again, very few voters will do what Charles has done and listen to the speech as a whole, because we live in a soundbite society, and man with a plan, you can see how he constructed the speech to come up with the 1 or 2 sound bites that would be replayed endlessly.
We all have to do it. Yes.
Yeah, everything's in 10 to 15 second sound bites. I think the main thing that wasn't in the speech was any policies, and what people are crying out for now are alternatives to Labour. They've got Labour fatigue, they've got Gordon Brown fatigue, and they just say, come up, tell us what you're going to do. And it's absolutely bloody perverse that he won't. He won't say what he's going to do. He talks about slimming down the machinery of government. Well, that is a crowd pleaser, and that's obviously the thing to do. The other thing that he said, which would resonate very well with the electorate, was dealing with the scandal of mixed awards in hospitals, which I'm amazed that Labour, Lord Darcy, hasn't done something more about. What did he say? He was going to have lots of rooms. That's not really an answer, but it was still more than Labour have said. So he said 1 or 2 things that were good, but they didn't add up to a whole load of policies.
All right. Richard Lambert.
Well, I think he had quite a tough job to do this week, because for a start he had to get out of the box that Mr. Brown had put him in as a kind of novice and a hopeless new beginner. So he had to be quite aggressive on that. But he also, because of what was going on in the rest of the world, had not to be rocking the boat. So it was kind of on the one hand jabbing with the left, and on the other hand being kind of supportive and all that stuff.
Did you think his argument about if it was experienced the county would have Gordon Brown forever was a convincing way of putting it?
I must say I gave a little gasp of pleasure when I heard that. I thought that's all right. I'll go for that.
What, for Gordon Brown forever?
No, I thought it was a good bit of oratory. I think my sense of it is, though, that at the moment it's more that people are fed up with Labour than that they're swept away by the Tories. And I think the Tories would make a big mistake if they just sat back and waited for something to fall in their lap, because we've got, as Charles said, a long time to go, and a lot of rocky things are going to happen over the next year. And if they just wait for it to happen, they might end up in the wrong place from their
There's a
point
lot
view.
of talk about whether they're convincing on the economy, whether George Osborne is persuasive. Just very briefly, do you think they've got a good story or a good line to take on the economy that persuades you, as the head of the CBI, that they would be the right people to run it?
I think they still have a lot to talk about and get clear in their minds about what they think the economy is. I don't think it's as clear where they stand on the economy as, for example, it was in Mrs. Thatcher's days. Not nearly as clear as that, where they're coming from. I think also what I slightly felt cross about in Mr Cameron's speech on Tuesday, which I thought was a good speech when he came on and said calm down about the money and all that. He did kind of conflate, he was kind of conflating business and the financial turmoil into one thing, and actually they're separate things, and I think he needs to get a clear idea of why business matters to our society.
The woman up there on the right.
One thing that did worry me about Cameron's speech, like compared to Brown's, was that he seemed to, he wanted to fix the economy through taking hard action which would probably hit the poorer communities and poorer citizens hard, and I don't think that will have won him many votes.
Okay. Michael Heseltine, do you agree with that?
Yes, it's a very fair point. One of the most common criticisms of politicians is that you can't believe a word they say. And of course, we're all in the business of putting over the best case we can for our own party and what we believe. So when David stands up and says, look, I have to tell you, it's very serious, and I don't have good news, and it's going to get worse. Actually, that requires a lot of guts. It is going to get worse. We have got a major problem on our hands, and he had the guts to say it. You're absolutely right. That's not the way to win votes, but it is the way to preserve your integrity. Now, the key question is, did he do enough? And the only answer to that question is we will know on polling night sometime in 2010. He happens to be in a position where he's got one of the biggest polling leads, last time I saw any polls, of any opposition leader in British history, and a government which has got one of the least popular prime ministers, again, in polling history. So he must be doing something right, but the important thing, always, is that governments lose long before oppositions win. And the moment that a government becomes unpopular, they clamour for the opposition to say what they would do. And why do they do that? Either because they get good ideas from the opposition, which this government systematically adopts, or they want to divert attention away from their own mistakes in order to hide their own difficulties. And I found Gordon Brown's argument, look, I've got experience. What's he actually saying? I've dug the biggest economic hole in British history, and I've taken 10 years... There's more to come. There's more to come. And I've got right deep in this hole, and I've got the experience to do what? To fill in the hole? No, to keep digging.
Have the Conservatives actually changed? They keep talking about how they've changed this week, but to me, all these changes only seem to be quite skin deep. At the heart, they still seem like the old Etonian kind of old boys club that they always have been.
Is that how you see them, Jack Smith? Old Shrewsbury boys.
Unlike Richard, I didn't gasp with pleasure at any point during David Cameron's speech, although, you know, I accept it was a well-received speech. I actually thought the line, man with a plan, was quite a good line. The trouble was that then the plan wasn't actually there, and we never got to see what the plan was. I think the fundamental problem, and actually where I agree with Michael, of course, is that in the end it will be, quite rightly, the British people who will determine whether or not and who should be the next government in this country, and nobody should take the British people for granted. But what I do know is that you can't form a government on the basis of a party that is one man deep and no policies wide, and people will want to know what any party that is standing to form a government in this country is going to do. And incidentally, they will want to know both what your experience is and also what your judgment is. Now, I agree with David Cameron that judgment is important. Where I disagree is that he's shown the right judgment, not least on what I've already described with respect to the wrong decisions at almost every occasion over the last year with respect to the financial crisis, but being unclear about what we need to do, for example, about energy policy in this country. Is it or is it not the case for the Tories that nuclear energy is only a last resort? About having decided on tax cuts and choosing a tax cut that benefits the top 3,000 estates in this country, thereby showing where their priorities lie. And when it comes to George Osborne, Michael, perhaps you can answer us on the supposed council tax pledge. Is it or is it not the case that the pledge is that everybody in this country will have their council tax frozen for the first 2 years of a Conservative government, because actually I read the small print, and I advise everybody else to read the small print.
Well,
and when you do, that is not actually the pledge that was being made.
Let's leave it there.
People didn't make that pledge.
People can decide on the minutiae. The question was whether the speech as a whole worked. But I thank you very much. I want to go on to a last question on a quite different and serious topic, which is from Josh Thomas, please. Josh Thomas.
Given the number of British people travelling to Switzerland to end their lives, do you think it's time for a rethink on the laws surrounding assisted suicide?
There's a case before the High Court on this, which we won't discuss, but on the general point, Charles Kennedy?
Well, my understanding is that the Home Secretary obviously can confirm, but there's been about 100 cases of people in this country who have assisted somebody to go to abroad, with Switzerland in particular, I think it is, to for terminal cases of this kind. As far as I'm aware, I think I'm right in saying there hasn't actually been a formal prosecution of any of the 100 so far. The issue at the moment, legally as I understand it, not the specific case, but the overall legal position, is that what's being sought here is proper clarification being handed down by the Director of Public Prosecutions. And that's not yet forthcoming, and I think it's slightly up in the air whether it will be forthcoming. Instinctively, on the broad issue, as opposed to the technicalities, I'm at the wary end